Now, my name is Runoko Rashidi. I've recently been awarded a doctorate degree, so you could call me Dr. Rashidi. I've kind of gotten used to that. I'm the author and editor of 9 books. I've been to Egypt 8 times now. I've visited 54 countries in the last 6 years. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud to say that I've lectured in 32 countries, and I believe I'm having an impact. I'm an African historian, not a historian who happens to be an African, but an African historian, and that means that my whole mission in life is using history to uplift African people. I reside in San Antonio, Texas, but I see myself as a citizen of the world, and it is simply an honor and pleasure to do the things that I do. I feel like I have been blessed by the ancestors and given a mission. I never thought I would be doing the things that I'm doing today almost routinely, and perhaps the lesson from that is that what from a distance oftentimes looks like an obstacle, as you approach that, what we perceive as an obstacle with vision and determination, in fact, becomes a stepping stone. And I am convinced that African people can do anything that we choose to do. And in a way, in my own humble way, I think I'm a living example of that. Well, this morning we have the great pleasure of being on the Giza Plateau. And in ancient times, during the time of the ancient Africans in Kemet, the area was actually called Kem, K-H-E-M. And this area is important because it is the scene of one of the wonders of ancient as well as modern times. And what we're looking at right behind me is what is called Khufu on the horizon, better known as the Great Pyramid of Giza. And we make these distinctions because there are at least 110 pyramids in Egypt alone, and this is the most famous and arguably the most important one. This one is made up of 2.3 million granite blocks, the average weight of which is 5,000 pounds, and some of them, I'm told, weigh up to 50,000 pounds. It sits on 13 acres of land, and one of the most remarkable aspects about it is that it wasn't cemented together. I think most people would think that a monument of this type must have been held together with some sort of mortar. But the Africans in ancient times cut these stones in such a precise manner that even now it is impossible to slide a razor blade, to put a piece of paper between them. Now, I think that several things need to be pointed out here. First of all, they weren't built by slaves. Now, that's a common notion, that slaves labored in inhumane conditions to build these monuments. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Africans, the pharaohs, the Herus, took great pride in how the workers were treated. We even have a sense now of what the people ate, where they lived, you know, how much vacation time they had, the sandals that they wore, the oil they got to anoint their bodies. And so we know that they weren't built by slaves. They were built by free Africans and were, in fact, construction projects. Now, perhaps the most significant thing of all about all of this is how it relates to the African, in particular, African-American heritage. I think that most of us have a tendency to believe that we come from a race of nothings and nobodies. And so we come here, in particular, to see that nothing could be further from the truth, that Africans have a history of great achievement, and nothing is greater than this. We don't really know exactly how these monuments were constructed. We can only guess, but the actual original plans have been lost. They were used largely as burial chambers for the kings. In fact, I believe this one was used as a burial chamber for the king, the queen, and even members of the family. And I think that if you look at this monument, which still staggers my imagination, although I've been here perhaps a dozen times, you get a sense of what African people can do by looking at what African people have done. And in a nutshell, I think this is the significance of this monument, which is called Khufu on the horizon. Now, the Greeks call this king Cheops, or Cheops, C-H-E-O-P-S, but the African name is Khufu, and we want to use the African names as much as possible. It was built approximately 4,600 years ago, but it still stands as a living testimony to the genius of African people. 2 questions have been raised. One is, what happened to the limestone? In other words, how has this particular monument changed from the time it was originally constructed about 4,600 years ago? And these are very good questions. I pointed out earlier that at one time, after the original construction, the outside of it was cased with limestone, the limestone polished and gleamed. But the limestone was stripped away by the Arab invaders of Egypt, who used it to build many of the mosques in what is now Old Cairo. And if you look closely, you can see that there's a hole in it, a gap that's been forced in there. That was not original. The idea must have been that a monument of this size must have contained a great deal of buried treasure. And as a result of that, some of that treasure was probably still inside, it was thought. And they couldn't find the original entrance to the pyramid. And so this hole was forced in there with the idea that they would find something of great value inside. And of course, that was never found. All kind of speculation has been brought forth about why the pyramids were constructed and who constructed them and all of that. In fact, I would say that this monument is a source of more pure speculation probably than any other monument in the world. And it's been said that this is the last of what are called the 7 original wonders of the world. And these wonders of the world were developed by the Greeks. And they include the Colossus of Rhodes. They include the Lighthouse of Alexandria. But this is the one monument that still remains intact. There have been earthquakes, there have been invasions, but this monument is essentially indestructible. And it is there for the whole world to see. It's been there again for 4,600 years. And I suspect that it'll be there for a lot longer. We're now in front of the Great Pyramid of Khafre. There are 3 large pyramids on the Giza Plateau. The first is built in the reign of a pharaoh named Khufu from Dynasty 4. And this is the pyramid of his son. Actually, there was another son involved, a man named Dadefre. But he is only on the throne for a short period of time, and his pyramid is never completed. So this is the second one, and for some people this is even more important than the first. This one is different in the sense that it still has some of the limestone on top. And so you get a clear idea on this one as to what they originally looked like. Again, this is built by a man named Khafre. And when I say built by, I don't mean that the pharaoh actually was the one who got out and did the physical labor. But he's the one who commissioned the construction of the monument. And this person is important also because he is not only responsible for this monument, but he's also important because he is the same person that commissioned the work on what we call the Great Sphinx, or Hormak, Heru on the horizon, and we will be seeing that in a bit. But anyway, this is a magnificent monument, not as precisely constructed as Khufu's. You can see it seems to have deteriorated a bit more. Perhaps he was in a rush to do it. Perhaps there wasn't enough time. There's nothing quite like Khufu's, but this is the second best. And again, this is the pyramid constructed by the pharaoh, the monarch named Khafre. And we'll also be seeing images of Khafre in the Egyptian Museum in the city of Cairo itself. We're in front of the monument, the famous monument that is commonly called the Great Sphinx. And the Africans would have called it Hormakhet or Heru Akhet, and that basically means Heru on the horizon. Now this monument is in the form of, it has the body of a lion and the head of the monarch or the king or the Heru. This word pharaoh apparently was not used until relatively recent times, as I understand it, and the king was known as the Heru, or the living incarnation of God. And this monument serves as a kind of a guardian deity on the Giza Plateau. This is where we are. So you have this particular monument, world famous, in front of the pyramid of Khafre. And Khafre is important to us because he comes to us from Dynasty 4, and he's responsible for the monument, the big pyramid that you see behind you, which is the second largest pyramid on the Giza Plateau, and the Great Sphinx itself. Now, you can see the most obvious part about it is the face has been mutilated, and that it was done deliberately, we think. Done by 2 people. First, a group of white slaves, that's right, white slaves, called Mamluks, probably in the 13th century. They come out of Western Asia. They may have been actually from Turkey, but certainly Western Asia, and certainly Caucasoid. And then it was damaged again in 1798 by Napoleon Bonaparte, or the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon seems to have had a very vindictive side, and he took his anger apparently out on this monument. Now, he went inside the Great Pyramid, and he came out all in a rush and all upset. Nobody knows exactly why. And tradition says he trained his artillery on the face of this particular monument. Now, there's a story that I want to tell about that, and I think it's a very interesting story. And that is, you can see the face, the nose, the lips, even the chin has been badly damaged. And I think most people would think that that's the end of the story, but it's not the end of the story. And we find that most of those pieces are still scattered around the world. They haven't been destroyed. They've been scattered, they've been fragmented. But some of the pieces, some of the major pieces are in the British Museum, and other pieces are in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And to me, that story is kind of a metaphor for African people, because we've been shattered. We've been fragmented. We've been scattered all over the place. But we are trying to become whole again. And the Egyptian government has been demanding for some time that the British government return the faces, the pieces of the face of the Sphinx, which they've refused to do. But the idea that this monument is in fact indestructible, that the face has been knocked around but is still there trying to become whole again, I think is symbolic of African people. We've been through the slave trade, we've been through the Ma'afa, we've been through Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, and we are becoming whole again. And part of this journey to the black land of Africa, known as Kemet, is a part of that journey to go home and become whole again. And that's a story that I really like to narrate, because I think it's symbolic of African people, African heritage, African culture, and our tradition.